step back in time, and rediscover the foods that once filled our plates but are now banned or restricted. These surprising bites from the 80s tell a wild food story. Let's dig in. In the 1980s, raw milk wasn't just available, it was often preferred. Sold openly in local grocery stores, roadside stands, and farmers markets, it came straight from the cow, unpasteurized, and full of flavor. Health-conscious families and rural communities embraced it for its creaminess, richness, and perceived health benefits. Many believed raw milk supported digestion, strengthened the immune system, and offered living enzymes that pasteurized milk lacked. For generations, it symbolized tradition, self-sufficiency, and a direct connection to the land. It mattered because it was seen as wholesome and untouched, milk the way nature intended. People swore by its taste and texture, often claiming it was superior to anything found on supermarket shelves. However, by the 1990s, rising concerns over foodborne illnesses like E. coli, listeria, and salmonella led to a wave of restrictions. Today, raw milk is illegal to sell in many states, unless under specific farm-to-consumer agreements. While advocates continue to fight for access, regulations remain firm in most places. Yes, orange juice-flavored cereal was real, and kids genuinely loved it in the early 80s. Kellogg's OJs promised the bold taste of fresh squeezed citrus packed into crunchy, sweetened loops. Launched in 1985, it was marketed as a vitamin-rich breakfast option with a tangy twist. Parents were drawn in by the promise of added nutrients and natural flavor, while kids were hooked on its bright color and sugary punch. It mattered because it perfectly captured the era's obsession with fortified foods. In a decade that blurred the line between healthy and fun, OJs stood out as a breakfast innovation. But not everyone was sold. Critics found the flavor artificial and strange, and nutrition experts raised concerns about its sugar content. Sales dwindled, and the cereal quietly disappeared from shelves. Today, OJs remains a curious footnote in cereal history, one part nostalgia, one part nutritional misfire. Orange cereal hasn't made a comeback since, and maybe that's for the best. This bright, artificial coloring lit up everything from candies to drinks in the 1980s, until it was suddenly pulled from shelves. Red dye number 2 was once the most widely used food dye in the United States, giving foods a bold, eye-catching red or pink hue. Introduced in the mid-20th century, it appeared in maraschino cherries, fruit-flavored snacks, boxed cakes, and sugary cereals. The vibrant color made foods look more appealing, especially to children. It was a visual trademark of many iconic snacks and treats. It mattered because it captured the flashy, over-the-top energy of the decade. Bright, intense colors gave food a futuristic appeal, perfectly aligned with the playful branding of the era. However, by the late 1980s, studies began linking red dye number 2 to potential cancer risks in lab animals. Public concern grew rapidly, prompting FDA reviews and leading to an eventual ban in food products. Since then, food manufacturers have turned to other synthetic dyes or natural alternatives to replicate that same bold look. Next, a wild meat delicacy that's been off the menu in most states. In rural areas during the 1980s, eating roadkill wasn't strange. It was simply practical. If someone hit a deer, rabbit, or raccoon, or found it freshly killed along a back road, it often ended up on the dinner table that night. For many families, especially in the South, Midwest, and Appalachia, salvaging roadkill meant access to free protein during hard times. It was an act of resourcefulness, not desperation. The logic was simple. Why let good meat go to waste when it could be safely cleaned, cooked, and eaten? It mattered because it helped stretch tight budgets, especially for those living off the land or surviving paycheck to paycheck. Properly handled and thoroughly cooked, the meat was just as safe as anything from a store or butcher. Eventually, concerns over parasites, contamination, and legal liability led many states to ban or regulate the practice. Some now require permits or inspections, while others prohibit it altogether. Once a symbol of rural thrift, roadkill cuisine now lives mostly in memory or folklore. In the 1980s, it wasn't uncommon for families to slaughter their own pigs, chickens, or goats right in the backyard. There were no licenses, no inspectors, and no paperwork involved. Just tradition, skill, and a sharp knife. Home slaughter was especially common in rural areas and among immigrant families who carried on cultural practices from their countries of origin. It was more affordable than buying meat at the store and often considered safer and more ethical by those who valued knowing exactly where their food came from. It mattered because it gave families complete control over their food supply. Every part of the animal was used. Nothing was wasted. Butchering was often a family event, tied to seasonal routines and cultural rituals. Over time, growing public health concerns about disease transmission and food safety led to tighter regulations. Most states now require inspections, permits, or ban unlicensed slaughtering for commercial purposes. Though still practiced privately in some areas, it's a tradition now hemmed in by modern laws. Did your family ever butcher at home? Let us know in the comments. In the 1980s, McDonald's fries were cooked in a rich blend of beef tallow, giving them a legendary flavor that fans still talk about. Crispier, meatier, and packed with umami depth, these fries had a golden crunch that vegetable oil just couldn't replicate. The use of beef fat gave them their signature taste: salty, savory, and slightly smoky. It mattered because it set the gold standard for fast food fries and defined a generation's idea of the perfect side dish. For many, that flavor was the taste of childhood, road trips, and after-school treats. However, rising concerns about saturated fats, cholesterol, and animal-based ingredients led to growing pressure from health advocates and vegetarian groups. By 1990, McDonald's officially switched to 100% vegetable oil. Bringing back beef tallow fries today would be nearly impossible without full transparency due to stricter labeling laws and dietary restrictions. The original formula now lives on in memory and in the complaints of nostalgic fry lovers everywhere. But before we dive into more banned bites, let's explore a once popular candy that literally came with a warning label. In the 1980s, candy cigarettes were a staple in corner stores, gas stations, and school vending machines. Made of chalky sugar sticks or bubble gum, they often featured red tips to resemble lit cigarettes. Some even came in boxes that looked just like real cigarette packs. They were marketed as innocent fun, just a playful way for kids to mimic adults. Children smoked them on the playground, imagining themselves as movie stars, rockers, or parents. They mattered because they reflected the era's normalization of smoking. Back then, cigarettes were everywhere. On TV, in restaurants, even in airplanes. Candy cigarettes blurred the line between pretend and habit, introducing kids to the ritual before they ever saw it as harmful. As research on tobacco's dangers grew and public sentiment shifted, these candies came under fire. Critics argued they glamorized smoking and encouraged lifelong addiction. By the 1990s, many countries, and several U.S. states, banned them outright or restricted their packaging. They're rarely seen today, and never without controversy. Before whey powders became the standard, many gym rats and health enthusiasts in the 1980s swore by raw egg shakes. The recipe was simple: crack a few eggs into a glass, add milk or orange juice, and gulp it down. Shell bits optional. The trend was supercharged by pop culture, especially with fitness icons like Rocky Balboa downing raw eggs on screen. To many, it symbolized toughness, discipline, and the raw power of pure, unprocessed protein. It mattered because it fit perfectly into the no pain, no gain mindset of the era. It wasn't about taste or texture. It was about grit, gains, and getting results. But as salmonella outbreaks increased, health officials raised alarms. Raw eggs were linked to serious bacterial infections, prompting food safety campaigns and tighter regulations on their consumption. Today, most commercial protein shakes use pasteurized egg products or powders. Drinking raw eggs isn't illegal everywhere, but it's strongly discouraged, especially in public food service settings. In the 1980s, adventurous American diners could find fugu, also known as pufferfish, on the menu at select Japanese restaurants. Prepared only by specially trained chefs, the dish was prized for its delicate flavor and notorious danger. Fugu contains tetrodotoxin, a powerful neurotoxin that can be fatal in even tiny amounts. Just one mistake in its preparation could cause paralysis or death. But for thrill seekers and culinary purists, that risk was part of the appeal. It mattered because it symbolized extreme trust in craftsmanship. Eating fugu wasn't just about taste, it was a rite of passage. A bold move that separated casual diners from true food adventurers. As awareness and concern over food safety grew, the U.S. government stepped in. Importing and serving fugu became tightly regulated. Only a handful of restaurants are now authorized to serve it under strict oversight. For most Americans, tasting real fugu requires a passport and nerves of steel. Next up, a school cafeteria classic that's now banned in multiple states for what's really inside. If you grew up in the 80s, there's a good chance your school cafeteria burgers, tacos, or sloppy joes were made with what's now known as pink slime. This controversial filler was created from beef trimmings treated with ammonia to kill bacteria, then mixed into ground beef to cut costs and reduce waste. It was flavorless and invisible, making it a quiet solution for schools and fast food chains trying to stretch limited budgets. Few people knew it existed, and fewer questioned what went into their meat. It mattered because it helped feed millions of students across the country, often without raising alarm. It was a cost-effective way to ensure meat stayed on the menu. That changed in the 2010s, when media coverage and public outcry exploded. Pink slime became a household phrase overnight. In response, many school districts and fast food chains dropped it, and new regulations were introduced to improve transparency and limit its use in consumer products. Did you grow up eating any of these? Let us know in the comments. Back in the 80s, no kid's snack stash was complete without a packet of Pop Rocks. These fizzy candies exploded in your mouth with a crackling sound, creating a sensory thrill that felt more like a science experiment than a sweet treat. Made with pressurized carbon dioxide, Pop Rocks delivered a mini eruption on your tongue. Kids loved chasing them with cola for an even bigger fizz, until rumors began to swirl. The most famous? That mixing Pop Rocks and soda could cause your stomach to explode. It mattered because it embodied the playful, over-the-top spirit of the decade. It was a candy that came with a built-in dare and sparked both excitement and fear on the playground. While the myth was totally false, the FDA received so many concerned calls that they set up a hotline to address the panic. Due to mounting parental concerns, some schools and stores banned them temporarily, but they never fully disappeared from shelves. Just don't try them with soda. In the 1980s, escolar quietly found its way onto seafood menus under more appealing names like white tuna or butterfish. Diners were drawn to its rich, buttery texture and clean, mild flavor. It was often served raw in sushi or seared like a high-end cut of fish, and few questioned its sudden popularity. What many didn't know was that escolar contains gempilotoxin, a natural wax ester that the human digestive system can't process. The result? Sudden, often severe digestive issues, earning it the unfortunate nickname, the laxative of the sea. It mattered because people genuinely enjoyed the taste. It was affordable, luxurious in texture, and chefs appreciated how easily it elevated a dish. But after a wave of complaints and uncomfortable dining experiences, countries like Japan and Italy banned its sale. In the US, it's still technically legal, though highly regulated and banned in several states. Today, most restaurants avoid serving it, not for taste, but to avoid consequences that no diner wants to remember. Next up, a buttery popcorn flavoring that turned deadly when inhaled by workers. In the 1980s, nothing said movie night like a bag of microwave popcorn filling the kitchen with that rich, buttery aroma. That unforgettable scent came from diacetyl, a chemical flavoring added to mimic real melted butter. It wasn't just in popcorn. Diacetyl was also found in chips, crackers, and baked goods, giving snacks a creamy, satisfying flavor profile that consumers adored. It mattered because it helped bring the magic of movie theater popcorn into every home. That golden flavor defined a generation of snacking, and many still associate it with childhood, VHS tapes, and weekends on the couch. But inside popcorn manufacturing plants, workers began developing a rare, irreversible lung disease from inhaling airborne diacetyl over long periods. The condition, eventually named popcorn lung, sparked lawsuits and investigations. In response, many companies voluntarily removed or replaced diacetyl in their products. While it hasn't been banned outright in all cases, its widespread use has sharply declined, especially in food manufacturing environments. Jello was everywhere in the 1980s, packed into lunchboxes, served at school parties, and layered into colorful molds for family gatherings. Its bright reds, yellows, and blues made it feel like edible confetti. Kids loved the wiggly texture and eye-catching colors, and parents saw it as a safe, easy dessert. That vibrant look came from artificial dyes like yellow number 5, red number 40, and blue number 1, ingredients widely used at the time without much scrutiny. The color wasn't just aesthetic, it was part of the experience, making each bite feel festive. It mattered because Jello represented fun, celebration, and trust in convenience foods. It was a symbol of American kitchens during an era when bright, bold food was embraced. But concerns grew as studies linked some of these dyes to behavioral issues in children and potential cancer risks in lab animals. While many countries banned or limited their use, the U.S. still permits them, with some warning labels. Today's gelatin snacks look a little less electric and a lot more cautious. Foie gras, made from the fattened liver of force-fed ducks or geese, was once considered the pinnacle of culinary sophistication, appearing in some upscale American homes during the 1980s. Imported from France or crafted by specialty farms, it was a go-to delicacy for high-end dinner parties and elegant restaurant menus. Its presence signaled status, refinement, and a love for European fine dining. Chefs admired its rich, velvety texture and luxurious flavor, while diners saw it as a rare indulgence meant for special occasions. It mattered because it represented more than just food. It was a cultural symbol of elegance and exclusivity. Serving foie gras showed you had refined taste and deep pockets. But growing animal welfare concerns over the force-feeding process, called gavage, led to public outcry. Critics condemned it as cruel, and several U.S. states, including California, banned its production or sale. Foie gras still exists legally in some regions, but its legacy remains sharply divided between gourmet tradition and ethical controversy. Next, the beloved party punch that could never be sold today. In the 1980s, Jello shots weren't just a novelty, they were a party must-have. Whether it was a backyard barbecue, college bash, or even a wedding, someone always showed up with a tray of neon-colored gelatin cups spiked with vodka, rum, or whatever was on hand. Some bars even served them over the counter, adding to their widespread appeal. Made by blending flavored gelatin with liquor and chilling it into firm, bite-sized servings, Jello shots were fun, festive, and deceptively easy to consume. Their sweetness masked the taste of alcohol, making it easy to lose track of just how much you were drinking. They mattered because they changed how alcohol was consumed, especially among younger crowds. Jello shots made drinking feel like dessert, which concerned parents, health officials, and lawmakers alike. As concerns grew over underage drinking and binge culture, many states banned or heavily regulated their sale in bars and restaurants. They remain a staple at private parties, but not behind the bar. Back in the 80s, digging into a box of cereal for a plastic prize was a morning ritual for millions of kids. Whether it was a tiny toy car, a decoder ring, a puzzle piece, or even a mini wristwatch, that little surprise made breakfast feel like an adventure. These prizes often came loose inside the cereal bag itself, meaning kids would eagerly plunge their hands into the box, sometimes before it was even opened properly. It turned breakfast into a treasure hunt. It mattered because it added excitement to everyday routines. Cereal brands competed fiercely to offer the best in-box goodies, making their products more about fun than food. But safety concerns eventually caught up. Some prizes had sharp edges, were breakable, or posed choking hazards. After several reported injuries and lawsuits, regulations were tightened. Prizes had to meet toy safety standards and be sealed separately. Today's cereal boxes are tamer, but for 80s kids, nothing beat that first dig into the box. In the 1980s, fried bologna was a school lunchroom favorite. Cafeteria workers would slice it thick, toss it on a hot griddle, and let it sizzle until the edges curled into crispy golden rings. Served on plain white bread or alongside mac and cheese, it was a simple, satisfying meal that kids actually looked forward to. Bologna was cheap, easy to prepare in bulk, and packed with enough protein to keep growing kids full until the end of the day. For schools operating on tight budgets, it was a practical solution that didn't sacrifice flavor. It mattered because it offered warmth, comfort, and familiarity during a time when many kids relied on school lunches as their most consistent meal. But as processed meats came under fire for their high sodium, nitrates, and links to health issues, fried bologna was slowly phased out. These days, you're more likely to find turkey wraps, veggie burgers, or low-sodium options on school trays than a sizzling slice of bologna. Up next, a lunchbox drink that looked like dessert, but came with a dangerous side effect. High C's Ecto Cooler, a vibrant tie-in with the Ghostbusters franchise, was one of the most iconic drinks of the 1980s. With its neon green hue and citrusy sweet flavor, it quickly became a lunchbox legend. Kids loved the taste, the color, and the connection to their favorite movie, while parents appreciated that it was fortified with vitamin C and marketed as a juice drink. The bright green glow came from a mix of artificial dyes, including yellow number 5 and blue number 1, both common in 80s processed foods. It wasn't just a beverage. It was a pop culture event poured into a juice box. It mattered because it perfectly captured what the decade was about. Licensed characters, colorful packaging, sugary treats, and fun first marketing. As health concerns about artificial dyes grew, especially their links to hyperactivity in children, some countries banned certain colorings, and U.S. brands began shifting toward natural alternatives. Ecto Cooler was discontinued, briefly revived, and now lives on as a treasured piece of childhood nostalgia. Tiny silver-coated balls known as dragees were once the crown jewels of dessert decorating. In the 1980s, they topped everything from wedding cakes to Christmas cookies, adding sparkle, texture, and a touch of elegance to any sweet creation. Their shiny exterior made desserts look professionally made, even when baked in a home kitchen. Though marketed as edible, early versions sometimes contained trace amounts of toxic metals like silver, and in older decades, even mercury. Few people questioned it back then. They were sold in baking aisles and used liberally by both pros and home bakers. They mattered because they made desserts feel magical, elevating even simple sugar cookies into something special. They were a tradition passed down through generations, linked to celebrations and childhood memories. But as food safety regulations evolved, the FDA stepped in. Today, dragees are often labeled for decorative use only, and in some states it's illegal to sell them as edible. Even if grandma swears by them, they're no longer meant to be eaten. Did your family ever decorate cookies or cakes with these shiny little beads? Let us know in the comments. In the 1980s, street hot dog stands were a fixture of urban life. Whether you were a tourist in Times Square or a construction worker on your lunch break, grabbing a hot dog from a sidewalk cart was a daily ritual. Vendors sold them boiled or grilled, tucked into soft buns, and topped with mustard, relish, onions, or sauerkraut. Simple, satisfying, and always within arm's reach. Many of these vendors operated without formal licenses, flying under the radar in bustling cityscapes where enforcement was lax. Nobody questioned it. If the cart was steaming and the line was long, that was all the approval needed. It mattered because it was street food at its most accessible, cheap, fast, and part of the city's rhythm. Every neighborhood had its go-to cart. But as food safety standards tightened and permit laws were enforced, many unlicensed vendors were shut down. Today, running a hot dog stand without proper documentation is illegal in most cities, changing the flavor of the streets forever. Coming up, a tropical fruit that looks innocent but hides a deadly secret. Ackee, the national fruit of Jamaica, made occasional appearances in U.S. markets during the 1980s, especially in areas with strong Caribbean communities. While beloved in dishes like ackee and saltfish, the fruit came with a serious health warning. If consumed before it's fully ripened and properly prepared, ackee can cause severe vomiting, seizures, or even death due to naturally occurring hypoglycin toxins. Despite these dangers, ackee remained a staple in Caribbean cuisine and was often imported in canned or preserved form to meet demand. For Jamaican families, it wasn't just a fruit. It was a vital connection to home, culture, and tradition. It mattered because it represented identity. Serving ackee wasn't about risk. It was about preserving heritage through flavor, ritual, and community. However, after multiple poisoning incidents, the FDA cracked down. Imports were heavily restricted, and only pre-processed, canned ackee that meets safety standards is allowed in the U.S. Selling or importing fresh, unripe ackee is now strictly illegal across the country. In the 1980s, sugar-free gum was having a moment. With the rise of diet culture, fitness trends, and low-calorie everything, gum brands jumped on the bandwagon. One sweetener, Cyclamate, stood out for its clean taste and long-lasting flavor. It offered minty freshness without the sugar or the guilt, and it quickly became a staple in purses, backpacks, and desk drawers across America. It mattered because it felt like a smart choice. Touted as dentist-approved and waistline-friendly, sugar-free gum with Cyclamate was embraced by health-conscious consumers looking for that perfect balance of flavor and function. But that changed when studies linked Cyclamate to cancer in lab rats. Though the evidence was debated, the FDA acted swiftly, banning its use in U.S. food products. By the 1990s, Cyclamate was replaced by aspartame, sucralose, and other alternatives. You won't find it in American gum today, although it's still approved in dozens of other countries. Its legacy lingers in the global debate over artificial sweeteners. Despite the name, head cheese isn't a dairy product. It's a savory meat jelly made from the head of a pig or calf, often including parts like the tongue, brain, or cheeks. In the 1980s, it was a common sight in butcher shops, often displayed with little or no labeling, and sold by weight to customers who knew exactly what they were getting. It was especially popular in Eastern European, Southern, and rural American communities, where traditional cooking emphasized using every part of the animal. Head cheese wasn't just practical, it was a delicacy made with pride, passed down through generations. It mattered because it reflected a no-waste, deeply rooted culinary tradition. In many homes, it was part of holidays, family gatherings, or simply a flavorful slice on a sandwich. But as food safety standards evolved, concerns over contamination and unlabeled ingredients led to tighter regulations. Today it's still available, but only through licensed processors with clear sourcing, full inspection, and transparent packaging. And finally, the sweet, brightly colored dessert that disappeared for safety reasons. In the 1980s, Kinder Surprise eggs were every kid's dream, a treat that combined chocolate and toys in one magical package. The shiny foil wrapping, the hollow milk chocolate shell, and the mystery toy inside made it more than just a snack. It was an experience. Each egg held a small plastic capsule containing a toy, which often required assembly. Some had tiny moving parts, sharp edges, or pieces that posed choking hazards. But back then, there were few warnings and no age restrictions. They mattered because they turned candy into an adventure. For many kids, cracking open a Kinder Egg wasn't just about the chocolate. It was the thrill of the unknown, the surprise inside that made it special. But U.S. law, specifically the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, prohibits embedding non-food items inside food products. I hope you enjoyed this journey through banned bites and bygone treats. Which ones shocked you the most? Drop a comment and subscribe for more food nostalgia. Until next time.